So I've been wanting to do a video for a while on this, and it's all about getting started with Linux. And I am going to choose Ubuntu because I do find it to be a very easy to install, easy to update operating system. And we're doing a bare metal, bare bones install right onto a machine. Granted, it's in VirtualBox for demonstration purposes, and we're going to get started. Now, part of the goal of this is to teach people who have never used Linux and are coming from the Windows world, how do they get started, how do they get going with Linux. Now, some people might say, hey, why not just set up a dual boot, or they want to go grab an old computer to get this going. The couple problems with that is, one, your experience on an old computer is not going to be all that great because, well, it's old and slow. And I don't want anyone to get the impression that Linux is old and slow. So you naturally create a problem when people go, oh, I grabbed my 8-year-old or 10-year-old desktop and loaded Linux, and I don't know, I didn't really like it that much. The goal is to do something you're going to use. And why not a dual boot? Well, once you can dual boot the operating system, you're probably not going to. You'll just go, well, it's conveniently in Windows and everything's saved here, and you just keep using it. So if you really want to commit to using it, you just kind of dive in there and start going. So as I walk through, and obviously the install is pretty straightforward here, we're going to want to download, install updates, do install third-party software. Now, what that is exactly like it says. Third-party software for graphics, Wi-Fi, hardware, flash, MP3, and other media. The concept in Linux is that everything should be open source. Well, Ubuntu has made it convenient in their installer by putting a checkbox on there to allow you to load extra things that may not be open source. The purists will go, no, you have to only load open source software. I live in the real world and there's things I need to get done, so I know there's some closed source software on my computer. One day maybe they'll all be open source, but in the real world right now, as what's available and to get my work done and conveniently play MP3 files, we're going to go ahead and download and install third party. Now, this is Ubuntu 16.10 because it is December 2016, and it is the currently released version that is available. Now, we're going to go ahead and erase the disk and install Ubuntu. We're going to go ahead and continue. Now this auto-completes, which is convenient. Set it to Detroit time, Eastern time. So we're here in Detroit. If you have custom layout, you can do the detect custom keyboard. Set a name. Now, at least if you didn't do a full disk encryption, do encrypt your home drive. Set Thomas VirtualBox. Set a password. Something weak, but good enough because I got to type it a lot of times during these reboots. Do set a good password. When you encrypt the home folder, that means the operating system itself will be accessible if you boot, but anything within the home folder, or if you're in the Windows world, the user folder will be completely encrypted. Don't lose your password. It's hard encryption. There's no easy way to reverse that. Well, actually, there is no way to reverse that. It just isn't going to happen if you use a good password. It's pretty much brute force bang away at it. Hopefully you can get it unencrypted. It's not easy, so they use really strong encryption on here. Okay, now it's going to start copying the files. Almost finished copying. You can expand out. It does tell you what it's doing for those you want to see. This is one of those things that I've always been annoyed about with Windows because we install a lot of Windows and it doesn't tell me enough stuff. I'm like, I want to know everything that's going on. Linux does give you the option of that, but they give you the option to hide it and just go, hey, I just watched the progress bar go across. Now, as I said, we're choosing Ubuntu as a distribution. I like it. I'm familiar with it. I've used lots of other distributions. I just find theirs to be stable, easy to find support for through the Ubuntu forums. So when you're starting out, it's a pretty good starting one. The downsides are some people really don't like the Unity interface. I've oddly I don't know, it's grown on me. I've been using Ubuntu for a really long time because years ago, they were one of the first solid desktop distributions to do really, really well. Now, my background comes from being a Linux admin and a Debian fan for a very long time, and I've been adminning Debian machines since the 90s, since their earliest releases when everything was super difficult to configure. Things have gotten substantially easier, or I've gotten smarter, or some combination of the two has occurred. So I will fast forward through a little bit of this because watching it install is not that exciting. It does go out and grab a lot of new files as it installs, which is a nice feature of these. The version, like I said, is 16.10, which is their part of their standard release cycle. You can get on the 04 versions, as in like 1604, 1504, 1404, so on and so forth. Those are their long-term release versions. The differences being you're going to get the latest and greatest when you're using their regular release cycles. And just in case you didn't know the Ubuntu naming scheme, it's actually fairly easy to figure out. 16 refers as in 2016 the year, and 04 is the month, and 10 is the month. So that's October or April for the releases. So that's kind of how you figure out how the releases are going to go, and they're consistently every year, once a year, they do a new long-term LTS or long-term support version, and during the middle is in October is when they'll do their updated release. What that means for long-term support is you don't necessarily get all the latest and greatest Linux features, but you are getting a code stable, not going to change, and don't need to upgrade your system. That being said, I don't really mind the updates because I've done in-place upgrades and not really had a problem. The particular machine I'm using, I think 3 versions of in-place upgrades, 3 years of it, 2 years, 3 years now. I generally don't have a problem. It's not like when Windows goes from version to version and you have a major upset of trying to run the upgrade. If anyone's been around as long as me and you remember the Windows 95 to 98 to ME to Windows 7 or Windows XP upgrade pass, that sometimes just break everything during the upgrade. Windows 10 seemed to go a little bit smoother for some people and a little bit rougher for others. But when in the Linux world, Ubuntu's got this pretty much figured out. Now, some of the other distributions, when they release new versions, don't allow upgrade. You just have to back up your home folder, reload, and copy your home folder back. Now, because Linux pulls from repositories, and we're going to talk about package management here in packages, you can actually go as far as to script and automatically reinstall the same applications again that came from the App Store. Obviously, ones that didn't come from their App Store that are third party, you would have to go back and download. But it's actually pretty trouble-free, and from scratch to set up doesn't take me too long to set up a Linux box because, well, once I copy on my home drive, the configuration settings for everything important to your customizations go into your home folder in the config files. So reinstalling the app, it finds the same config files as long as it's the same version, no problems. And there are some Linux distributions that don't do releases at all. They do rolling releases, which people think that's a new thing because they see Windows 10 has gone to that. That's not new for the Linux world. There's been other distributions for a little while that do what they refer to as a rolling release because they update everything compartmentally as a component. So a application gets an update and it doesn't change the version number of the Linux. So each core component can get updated as there's a new update available without doing a whole rewrite. I actually see that probably being the future of some of the companies going more that way. It has its own challenges, but for the most part, we're just going to be talking about Ubuntu and their release cycles. Installation is complete, so we reboot. And now we're at a login prompt. And it comes up with a list of keyboard shortcuts. Because it's the first time we've logged in, lets me know that there's a few different things to do. So the first thing we do is open up the software updater because we want this to load updates for the software. And there's always a few updates to go ahead and install. Now there's different ways you can do this. I can do look at the detail. I can do this from the command line and watch all the little details to it. We're just going to go ahead and run through the install and install now. Also, this is another option. This is the kind of like a backup password for your encrypted hard drive if you ever have to boot off a recovery. There is a way Ubuntu does have, if you have the password, they have a recovery method. I highly recommend, in case of any corruption, back up everything when you have an encrypted drive. Make sure everything's backed up. That way if something happens, something gets corrupted, or someone steals your laptop, you can just replace all your files. So a good idea to have a backup. We'll talk about that later though, but for now we're just going to set up the encrypted passphrase. All right, and we'll go ahead and load these updates, and you can see all the details of what it's updating. Install now. And for every update, they're very, very clear. Now we're going to go ahead and show the command line. Now this you can think of as a UAC in Windows. It's telling you that there's something at the system level, not just the user space, that needs to be replaced. That's a more critical function. So it prompts you for another password, basically to say I need elevated permissions because we're replacing a core component, which right now you can see it's downloading the Linux kernel. And it's actually going to show you, because I expanded out, exactly what it's replacing. Once again, this is just something I really like in Linux. You can look through and see exactly what files are being replaced as it does it. Nothing's obscured. And this can all be run from the command line as well if you wanted even more detail, because you can do configuration options that show you, like, hey, run this update and show me everything that you're doing. Okay, now, I know you're used to seeing restarts if you're a Windows user. Linux actually doesn't want to restart that often. The only times it really does want to restart is when there is a kernel update. For now, Ubuntu is not running a tool called Ksplice, which is an updated way you can patch kernels without having to restart that is used in some of the server world. It doesn't happen often, only when there's new kernel releases, so we're going to go ahead and reboot it. All right, so we're restarted and ready to get started. And we can start by looking at maybe some of the system settings, and we'll start customizing a little bit. First, let's cover a couple things. One, you don't have a start button in here like you do, or whatever you want to call it in Windows 10. Linux, there are some distributions. Now, the difference between different distributions, it really comes down to kind of the underworkings for one, the package management system, and the interface, which is the top. Ubuntu has a really popular base, which Ubuntu itself is based off of the Debian, so it has the same package management, but Ubuntu used Unity on top of it. Unity, like I said, there's some people that like it, some people that don't. I'm kind of used to it. Then other ones are the Kubuntu, which uses the KDE interface, which is really good eye candy. It looks really nice. It has its own little quirks to it, but it's a nice interface. And then there's the GNOME-Ubuntu, which uses the GNOME interface. And like I said, we're just going to cover Unity for now. I mean, I'm going to do some other distro reviews to kind of show the differences between them later, but that's a whole different video. This is basically getting started with Ubuntu and their package management system, which is referred to as apt. All right, so in the system settings here, you have all your usual stuff: security, privacy, power settings if it's a laptop, so you can set power down times. You can set them in here too. Screen brightness options, dim the screens, lock the screen, go back to the lock screen so they have to put the password in. You turn it on and off. Now when you switch these, there's not an apply button. They've gotten rid of that. It actually was in previous versions. People are getting used to when you set a setting, it sets. So you don't have to do that. Screen display, that's where you're going to change your resolutions and things like that. This is a 191080. If you have multiple displays, they all show up here. So you can configure all of your monitors. I'll drag over. This is mine. You can see, like, you know, I have a triple monitor setup, so you can see all the different monitors. Bring that back out of the way. Back to our VirtualBox here. So it calls it by the screen name, which is VirtualBox, so it calls it VBX0. If you notice in mine, it might have been real small print, but it actually labels them as each ASUS monitor I have. You can change the rotation clockwise, whether or not you want the displays to display on each one. Look for the launcher placement, this is the launcher. So we'll go back to here. Now, kind of nice for navigation, you have these things like that, but there's a couple things I don't like that I usually change right away. So we go to appearance again. We're going to go to behavior. I kind of like this to auto hide. I'll leave it not auto hiding for now, but if you noticed, the menus are way over here. I don't know why they decided to do this. Let's open up Firefox, for example, or even the file manager. So here's the different windows for things, and what you're going to notice, there's no menus here. They're up here. That is silly to me. So, but one of the wonderful things about Linux is the fact that you can really change these things. So we're going to go ahead and change in the Windows title bar for show menu folders. Now, pressing Alt displays them, or we can tell them to be always displayed. Kind of always displayed makes sense to me. I know right where to click rather than clicking Alt or mouse overing them. I don't really, I guess it makes a cleaner look, because let's see, if you go here and we have them on, they're all showing. Display and mouse hovering, it tells you what it is. That just comes down to personal preference of however you want that. Auto hide, which is this right here. It'll auto hide this, and you can make it so when you mouse over it, it comes back. I'm not going to bother with that. It's actually awkward for me because I'm using the middle screen to record this, so I keep wanting my mouse to move past it instead of hovering over it. Normally you put it at one end and it stops there and it stays sticky. Enable workspaces. Now this is a pretty neat feature because what this does is you have different virtual workspaces. There's been tools over the years to do this in Windows, and they've always copied it off the fact that it's been a popular thing in Linux. These are 4 separate workspaces, and it allows me to have things in different ones. And what this allows me to do is I can set up this workspace, have a bunch of things open, jump over to this workspace, and open different things. So now we have like 2 Mozilla ones over here and 2 things over here, and then I can go over here and still have another workspace. You get used to working with this. It's pretty efficient because it allows you just to slide things around to different workspaces and then save them there. I think something like this works in Mac. I'm not much of a Mac guy, but I think they've had something like this for a little while too. But there's a series of different commands where that's a little bit more advanced to show you each little key command to move around workspaces. But when you enable them, they're a handy feature. So you can be copying and setting up a bunch of files for someone over there, then have your web browser full screen in another one. So that's kind of your overview of the workspaces. Now, another feature you have is whenever you're in a program pressing the super key, Windows key for most people, it allows you to search those commands inside of each thing you're in. So instead of going through here, and it's probably more demoed with LibreOffice. So there's a lot of things up here, rows, calendars, but if we do this, whoops, it actually allows you to search everything with the word row in it for each first row instead of having to go through and navigate the menus. This has always been a feature, and it's built into Ubuntu, and it's one of them that once you get used to using and you use a lot of tools that have a lot of menus, you quit looking for the menus because you can just type in the first couple letters of the menu and pull the menu right up. So that's always been pretty cool, and it really handy to get things going. So you're like, okay, I don't remember where this is, and I don't want to go through the each one to look for it. You can do it that way. Like I said, that's built right in there into Ubuntu. Now here's where all of your applications are. Now it is not showing much, and you can then file and folder applications, code, graphics. It starts categorizing them, but it also lets you search them. So you can just type in different letters, like we'll type in CA, and we're going to find the calendar, calc, or the screenshot tool. So we can open up the calendar. Pretty cool and pretty handy. Now if you want this to stay on the launcher, I just right click, lock to launcher. So now it's not in use and it's in use. Now Ubuntu had some partnership with Amazon, and I thought it's kind of weird, but they put it on the launcher. You can just remove it. Okay, so we have it all set up and configured, and Firefox is on here, but a lot of people are going, wait a minute, I like Chrome. That's fine. I kind of like Chrome too. I know I've surrendered part of my soul to the thing that is Google, but it works so well. And I do use Google Apps and G Suite, and it just works really well in Chrome. So let's talk about how you download and install things. Now, because it's based on Debian, Debian uses .deb packages. You can kind of think of them as an MSI installer for Windows, and for different distributions there are different packages. So for Debian, it's like it says .deb. For Red Hat, it's RPM, and like I said, so on and so forth for each one out there. Each one has a different way they package things. Now, packaging is a little bit weird because I'd like it to be universal, but there's disagreements in the open source world occasionally, so it's less universal, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be. It's not confusing that much. Once you stick with one distribution and you stay with it, that's part of the reason a lot of people do, is because they get familiar with the package manager. Now, the package manager is referred to as apt in Debian, and that carries over into Ubuntu, even though they are moving over to another system called Snap. But right now, apt is still the way to go. And you apt-get from their software repositories and pull in different software. So we're going to start by, let's get Google Chrome. Yeah, show me default there. We'll just put in Chrome. Oh, look, it's the first result. Download Chrome. Now, I did load 64-bit, so we're going to load the Debian Ubuntu 64-bit.deb file. We're going to do an accept and install. Open with software install default. Let's go ahead and show you how to do this from the command line. It's really not that hard. I like to do it this way a little bit better, because it'll tell you what it's doing. So if you type in TER for terminal, you can open up the terminal, cd downloads. There's the file, because by default it's going to go into downloads, and we would do superuser do dpkg-I for install. And what I'm doing is the tab autocomplete, so I type in go, it's the only file in here with that name, and this is how you would install it from the command line, which is pretty straightforward. But we do this, it's going to ask you for your password, and it should fail because it's going to find something it needs. Now this is actually kind of a feature that confuses people, but also is really easy to fix. So it failed. It says errors were encountered while doing this process. Sudo apt get install -f, which means fix whatever failed, which means Google says, hey, you tried to load this, but we're missing this other package. You would have got a series of prompts, so you just say okay to if you want to do it from there. I like seeing everything it's going to load. So if I do this, it says, hey, here's all those things that are missing. You want to go ahead and load them? Which it'll say it needed lib app indicator 1 and lib bind indicator 7, and just press enter. It goes and fetches them and goes, okay, I'm going to finish putting Google Chrome in here. Done. Now we can open up Google Chrome. I'll go ahead and make it the default web browser too. So that is the combination, you know, how to install things on there. Now if you wanted to remove Google Chrome, it's pretty straightforward as well. We can go to sudo superuser do. That's basically your UAC saying run this as superuser, and we use the apt-get tool to remove, and we could say, I think it was called Google Chrome, Google Chrome. Confirm, and it is now uninstalled from the system. So pretty neat. And let's go to our files and let's install it again. Go to downloads, and we'll do it the other way, just to show you both ways you can do this. Open with the software install. I could have just double clicked it. This software contains third-party non-free components, and it'll finish the install after a prompt here. So both ways work. I just am partial to the command line. One, I know it. Two, I like watching everything that's going on behind the scenes with my computer. I like to say, hey, what's it doing? What's it doing behind there? But you know, this is where Ubuntu is really nice. It does give you the option to hide all that and say, there you go. We took care of all those little things. We did all those commands for you, and you're done. It's installed. So that's a nice feature of the Software Center. But like I said, we can talk both about the command line and that. So now we have Google Chrome installed in here. Now, what other software do we need? I like to do video editing, and that is not... the latest version is not available, so we can actually do from the command line, and I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger, and I'm going to make it a little bit easier to read. So let's go to the preferences here. I usually do this in my terminals. Profile, edit, color, green on black. I don't know, that just looks better to me, and now that's saved. View, we'll do zoom in, and we'll set the terminal size a little bit smaller so you can see what I'm typing. All right. So because everything's through a package management system, when you go apt-get update, it's listing out all these different packages that where it's pulling the packages from. Now with Windows, you only have Windows Update, and it's one in each tool. Let's say Adobe has their own updater and Google Chrome has a Chrome updater. Well, in the Linux world, they consolidated all of these with the app system, so each company can add their own list, and it's handled by the package manager. So we're going to open up the software updater, and it performs these queries when I open it up. Go to settings because we want to see the detail, other software, and right here it is, dl.google.com. That means Google has their own packages and they've now added it. You can also add, edit, or remove other software on here. So if you have an application that you want to add in here, because you want another tool that is not available through the Ubuntu repositories. For example, like Google maintains the packages for it. Now this one Windows, compared to the Windows Updater, picture Windows Updater, instead of every tool having their own update, it's one central update for the system that updates all the other software that you've loaded on the system. Here's the different updates: download daily, weekly. You can choose like lots of details. This is also for the driver options. You can have updates for the drivers. These are what they refer to as signing keys. These are really important. So when you're adding things on there, it will do things such as making sure that the software is authenticated from the source and uses a signing key to make sure no weird software gets in there that wasn't signed by the author, which is really important for security. This also allows you to download source code for any of these, which is really nice. It chooses the server that you want to download from. I'm close to Canada, so I guess it defaulted to Canada. I don't know. Kind of neat too, you can add CD-ROMs or DVDs as static sources for them. And what that means is, let's say you loaded Ubuntu but didn't load all the features. You can load a static source such as a DVD, which has lots of software on there, and it can pull from that software. Downside is it's not going to pull the latest version because it's going to pull from the DVD. So only if you're in some type of limited or low bandwidth place, maybe you want to do that. Now let's talk about some of the custom software I use in adding a PPA. This is pretty cool. So let's go to Kdenlive, which is the video editing software that I use. Now, PPAs are the third-party repositories for software. And now, Kdenlive is actually in the Ubuntu universe, but for one reason or another, and I don't get into all the details of this, they may not have the latest and greatest version, so the Kdenlive people offer their own PPA for it. And because a lot of things are built off of Debian, they have options for Debian and Ubuntu, which not just .deb files that are compiled for them, but they have the PPAs. And it's pretty easy to do a PPA. You can literally copy and paste. You're not really supposed to copy and paste things off of web because you can do hidden stuff, but as long as you're making sure you get the command right. So sudo apt-get repository PPA Kdenlive, let's do a copy, paste. We press enter. We're confirming we're adding another library. Also, because I had done sudo previously and typed in the password, basically, like I said, it's like a UAC. It doesn't bug me about it every time unless I close this session and open it again. Then it's going to ask me again. But now we want to do a sudo apt-get update. And what that does, first, now we've added to the repositories. And I'm doing this from the command line. I can open up the software updater and you can see it again. But now we see there's more things in here. So we have PPA Launchpad Kdenlive, PPA this here. And what this is, downloading more information about those. And it just added to my list of software that I can install. So now when I say install Kdenlive, and I'm auto-completing again by pressing tab, there's all kinds of libraries that it has, and this is where it gets really smart. It goes, these are all the things you need to install, and these are the versions that we need to install with it. So we're going to press enter, and it's going to rip through and download and install all the things needed for Kdenlive and add it to the menus. So like I said, it's not too hard, and they're telling you right away inside of here how to do it. And let me show you back on the other page. It literally is this command, then sudo apt-get update to update the fact that your library, and it keeps making like a locally cached library of all the software available in all the thousands of packages, and then you pick the package you want to install, apt-get install Kdenlive. Now it handles this really smooth because the other thing that it's actually doing, Kdenlive is available in Ubuntu, but it's not the same version. It's not as new as the version that I'm downloading right now directly from the PPA extra library for Kdenlive. So it looks at the two versions and pulls in whichever one's newer. So it goes, well, I found this package in both, but the one inside of the PPA here was newer, so we're going to pull that one. And this is how you can add some of these third-party softwares to Ubuntu and keep them all up to date. And like I said, this shows up back in the software list, so every time I have these updates to run, which I have it run to all my computers by default, look daily at updates. And so if there's anything new from any one of those update sources, it says, hey, there's new software to install, and prompts me, and I click install. It's always the joke with Linux people going, what new cool thing did I get with the new update? we aren't bothered much by updates in Linux. One, they go fairly fast. Most of the time is spent downloading, not installing. Granted, I am running on an SSD, but the updates are very clear about what they're doing, and they install really, really fast. The way the system is, it only has to replace each part. One of the problems I'm seeing in Windows, and especially with these new roll-up updates, it's becoming these larger monolithic updates that seem to take forever to get installed. And like I said, this has been a big advantage with Ubuntu and some of these. Right now, we're downloading almost 300 megabytes at the middle of the day at my office, and it's not going as fast as I like, but it's still reasonably fast. Once you see it kicks off the actual part of the install, it rips through it really fast. None of the updates really take that long. All right, now it's done and installed. Now, one of the fun things you can do in here, and I'm just pressing the up arrow to bring this back, is if you have a list of software that you want to install, and I've actually done this, I make a little list of all the things I install. You could write this into a script and you can tie everything together. So I know I like to install Nmap, ZenMap, there's another tool called Genie, which is a editor tool, Geany, and we're going to put a star after it because what it's doing is showing all the plugins, and then press enter. And what it just did by putting an asterisk after Genie and those other ones, you can string the command together and say just install all these things. And so when I set up a new laptop, I drop in one really long string for everything, and it just throws everything together and in there and installs it for me. So that's why it doesn't take too long when you're pulling things out of the repository. Add the couple PPAs that you have, which for me is the only ones I add is for OBS, which is Open Broadcast System, which is the one I use for recording these videos, and Kdenlive. Most everything else I want is inside the repository. So I just dropped an apt-get install string and a whole list only separated by spaces with all the different tools that I need on my computer, because I just kind of make a list of the programs I use, and it'll run through, set them all up, and configure them for me. And in the case of a reinstall, let's say from a crashed hard drive, all of your settings files, we're going to show you where those are in your home. It realizes where they are and says, oh, there's all your configurations. We'll just bring everything right over with it. So let's look at the directory structure here. So here's my home, and the config files are all hidden. And I'll show you how you see them. LA means, show all and list them all. And this is a wrapper for the encryptfs, which is the encrypted desktop. It's hidden from you to see your folder. I have my .profile, .pki, .templates, .xauthority, xsession. That seems confusing, so let's actually look at it from here where it's less confusing. So by default, like as it said, there's my downloads. You have documents, downloads, music, pictures, very similar to the way Windows does. But we're going to hit Control H, and all I did was say, show me those hidden files. And you have all the different places where things are setting in all your settings. Now, Mozilla, for example, has its own .mozilla folder with that. So here's my .config, and these are some of the UI config settings, Evolution, GNOME settings, Google Chrome stores here. Lots of things store things under .config. So these are the files basically that you copy over when you're doing a backup, and this is where all of your settings get brought over to a new system. So anything new you add gets set up inside of here. Now, just because I installed the program actually doesn't mean that there's automatically a file for it here. Some of them, when you first open them, that's when they start creating the .config files. So that's just kind of a quick overview. We're not going to get too in-depth on that, but just so you know where they're at, they're not hidden. And that means when you're backing up, you just have to really back up your home folder. And that can be as simple as just copying everything in foam, and everything from your home folder to an external hard drive, preferably something encrypted, which isn't that hard to do. I'll do another tutorial on just how to set up encrypted drives. When you format, it's a checkbox, and you set a password for the drive, and it's encrypted. Any other Linux box can decrypt it that's running Ubuntu or a lot of other different flavors, because it's using a commonly used open source encryption system for disk encryption. So let's close this. Go back over here, and we'll talk a little bit more about file system navigation and customization. Actually, Customization's pretty straightforward. You can change things in here. They don't give you a ton of tools out of the box to customize it, other than like, you know, changing the wallpaper and things like that. If you want to get more in depth, there is a Unity tweak tool. So we're going to open up the terminal again, and I guess we'll load that real quick. So I guess customization is an important part of this. We'll just run a, I'm going to make this a little bigger to make it easier to read. Now, because I closed it, when I type sudo, it's going to prompt me for a password again. The Unity tweak tool, apt-get install Unity tweak. And this actually allows you to install some of the different themes. But this allows you to control some of the different features in here. You can customize the panel, the time, the clock, the web apps. It's basically, Unity Tweak Tool is a free tool to unlock a lot more details about how everything works. So you can make it wiggle or pulse or open applications in the background, show desktop icon. Gives you just a whole lot of things, the way it scrolls, fonts, cursors. You can change themes. This is kind of a white theme that's in here. You can get different themes. I actually run the Numix theme, which is kind of neat. So we'll cover that maybe in its own episode, but this is the tool that lets you start tweaking and breaking things if you really want to start customizing it. It is an option. That's one nice thing about Linux, is everything's kind of opened up. Ubuntu themselves, the way they ship it, they want you to just use it, but you want to start digging more into it. Absolutely, load the tweak tool and have fun. All right, file navigation. Now, by default, when I open that up, we're in Home, and there's the option in here where we can open this in tabs. So we can open up actually lots of tabs. Documents, downloads, that's a shortcut, so we'll open this one. And now you can see in this one, I have that. And then I can go over here, Pictures, open up another one, and we can kind of create new folder. And then have that one in a different tab. Now, that's all pretty neat. So let's show you what it looks like when we actually start copying files. So we're going to copy to the documents. That was a little fast, so it didn't really have much to tell me. Let me find a big file here. Now, to open up Windows shares, this is important. When you're up here, Control L brings up this. Now, this actually autocompletes as well, so we can look at the root here. We can use the autocomplete feature. So as we type, it automatically figures out what the next possible is, or you can just click through it. You can go SMB, which for server message block. So that is how we connect to one of our Windows shares. Connect to my computer. Connect to my shared folder. And now if we want to just say copy a file. So let's find something I can copy that's not too big. And oh, just like Windows, here's your sorting options. How you want to view things, columns. Let's grab this one file. Now we can do a copy to the home folder here, and it copied right over. Let me find a file that's bigger that actually gives us a trash. Now you also, when you trash something, you can undo it. There is a garbage at the bottom, just like a recycle bin in Windows. So if we delete this, empty, and it's gone. So a lot of the same functionality that you might be familiar with in Windows, you can find inside of here. Now also, once you've connected to a server, it stays connected. So let's go back over here to video. Pull it up as a list. Let's find some of my video stuff here. Find something a little bit bigger right here. Copy. Paste. and it brings up the dialog but for larger copies. These are kind of cool because they'll start showing you all the different files you're copying from different locations into here, and it's kind of neat. They show up everywhere. You can hide them by clicking on them, and when they're done, you can see the history of larger files that have been copied. So kind of neat. Now for searching and finding files, so we're going to delete this because we don't need it in here. Revert to previous version, some of that, compress properties, those are in there. If you want to zip it, you can hit compress. That works as well. So I'm going to move it to the trash. But when you need to find a file, this is your search function. And it searches through all the documents on there and can quickly find things. So now back to the server because I'm connected to it. This disconnects you from that share. This keeps you connected to the share, so you can always just go back to it. You also have an option to add shares as a bookmark. That way you don't have to type them in each time like this, and they'll stay statically linked right down here. You can do the same for individual folders. So once you find any folder you want, this is my video archive folder, for example, you can take and pin any one of these as a bookmark. All right, and to bookmark another folder, we're just going to go to, you can bookmark this location, and there it'll give me the entire one. If you mouse over it, you're going to see that it pulls up where it is that I'm pulling that from. Now, I don't really like the way they did this, but it's fine once you're used to it. File, new window is up here, preferences to change things and customize the default behaviors. But they took away new folder, which used to be here, and they took it away. They moved it over to here. So when you want to create a new folder somewhere, you just do it right here, or you can right click within the folder. Not a big deal, but it's something to note that what they refer to now as the hamburger menu, and lots of things like Android Net have gone to this. Lots of things go to the hamburger menu to do this. Also, enter location is here, but you also, as I said, Control L does this as well. That takes it out of like the default view to that. So you can actually just type on there. Now, if you notice also, the slashes are trailing inverted to the way they do in Windows. They are falling forward slash versus backslashes when you're connecting to things. That included when I connected to the different servers. It's SMB : / not backslash. So they're going the other way. Just something to note when you're typing things in. And I guess that's one of those things that when you jump back and forth between Windows, I don't think about as much because I do both. But if once you stay in one system for so long, you got to remember the slashes go the other way in some circumstances. They're more like they are in a web, where the slashes are like they are in a web. They've always been backwards in Windows when you're doing file sharing. At least backwards to me because I've used Linux for so long. So that's kind of the basics how you navigate around the file system. One more thing you can do that's really cool, SFTP. So you can type in SFTP : / I'm going to go ahead and put the username, which is Pi 192.168.3.14, which is my Raspberry Pi. Go ahead and log in anyways. Now, what this allowed me to do is I'm now connected to the root of the Raspberry Pi file system. And I can bookmark it, I can treat it like anything else. So this one's a Samba share, and this one's a Raspberry Pi share. So as you can see, connected to the Pi, it's just like being connected to the Windows server, and I'll stretch this out a little more. So this is a Samba share. This is actually an SFTP versus an SMB share, so it's actually sharing over SSH. But this becomes really handy for when I work on websites because I can just SFTP into a website, leave it connected, and I can copy files back and forth. Not to mention, when I'm opening things, I can open them and edit them right on that server over SFTP, and it works all the same. Now, one of the things I did install here was another application called Genie. So we're going to select Genie now to open this. And now I can open it with this and edit it. Now, this makes it really nice because I can edit copies. Some of the copies can be on here, and then we can open a file over here and be editing it, and open a file on here, and I can use one application even though it has now spanned all the different files. And this, like I said, it becomes really seamless for me in Linux because the file manager is allowing me to connect to all these different things. So view all applications, and I know this is an XML file, so if I open this with Genie, Now I've opened one file on one server, another file on another server. Neither one of these are local. So this allows a lot of people, especially if you're doing code editing and compiling, it makes Linux very favorable to them because it's really easy for them to navigate all these different file systems, connect them all to one machine, and work remotely on them and edit. So all the execution can be occurring on another server. You're doing all the command editing from here, and then you can go there for the execution. So it's kind of an overview. It gets you started with Linux. I'm also using a few other. Let's go ahead and throw in one more program on here so we can apt-get. Whoops, don't forget to do this. Actually, this will happen to you a lot, and I'll show you what it does. Apt-get install KMyMoney. Could not open the lock file, and the first thing you go, permission denied, and then people Google it and they forgot to put super user do to give you the elevated permission to allow you to install the software. And then this will install the new version of the KMyMoney software. Like I said, I like doing this from the command line, and most of these websites you go to, you can do it this way. It tells you what the command is to install them right out of there. I didn't have to add as a repository. It's built right into the Ubuntu system. They generally, most of the packages are really up to date. The video editing software, the Kdenlive, does not seem to be as up to date inside the Ubuntu universe, and I like to have cutting edge because I edit so many videos. All right, now that installed that program, which is the program I use for managing all my ledger and everything for my business, for application management. And you can find a lot of equivalent to, so depending on what you want to do, you can find different software to replace whatever you're trying to do in Windows. For me, QuickBooks, I'm not a big fan of it. They do have QuickBooks Online, which most things do work through a web browser nowadays, which makes running Linux way easier than ever before. But for things like financial management, not a fan of it. I use the KMyMoney. I've done a whole tutorial on just this program for using it for business ledgers, but it's really, really full-featured and oddly cross-platform as well, so you can get this for your Windows machines as well. But like I said, not hard to install. Most of the different programs you want for Linux, you could generally go around and find a way to install them. Or find an equivalent version, I should say, not really find a way to install them. Easy to install them, find an equivalent version for what you're trying to get done. So I just want to do this video. It's kind of a getting started and talking about Linux. I will show you this because I'm going to shut this machine down. This is my virtual machine, and I'll show you how I run Windows inside of this. So this is my virtual box, and this is my problem solver, so to speak. So yes, I have a Windows 7 and a Windows XP. Turns out my check writing program does not support Linux. Shocker, right? And I haven't found a good check writing program because I actually get the check stock and replace it. I can print my checks in Linux. I just can't the actual production of the stock. So what we do is we fire up a virtual box and I run Windows inside of it. The other thing I do is Photoshop. I just have tried with GIMP, and Kira is really coming along. Both of those are really cool tools, and neither of them are all that great in terms of compared to Photoshop. I've done design work for almost 15 or 16 years with, since the earliest versions of Photoshop. And once you're used to using it, it's really hard to get away. Now, I don't dual boot, like I said. That way I'm focused on Linux, and this was how I got started in this years ago, was running Linux as my primary OS. And then I just use VirtualBox, which is free, easy to install. I believe they have a PPA as well, but you can download and run it and install it. I can't download and install VirtualBox. It gives an error if you run VirtualBox inside of a VirtualBox last time I checked. But this is my solution for that one thing I have to do in Windows, or if I have to test something in Windows. I should probably do a whole tutorial on just how VirtualBox works and sets that up. Maybe that'll be another video if I get around to it soon enough. Maybe I'll get it done today. But with VirtualBox, that allows me to run any Windows apps that I need to run, and I can just install in Windows. Now, the other thing with VirtualBox is it creates snapshots. So I can say, create a snapshot of this, try, install, do a demo of some software, roll it right back, and away we go. It deletes everything that I did. That's another advantage of VirtualBox. But this is like when I just can't do something inside of Linux. Yes, I will admit I do have to run Windows for some things, Photoshop being one of them. I've followed the tutorials. Photoshop, I've always had font problems with following the tutorials and trying to get it work properly in Ubuntu. So that's kind of been my weak spot getting that done. So questions and comments, leave them below, and reach out to me. I love converting people over to Linux, and I'll be working on more and more detailed videos on some of the different tools. But if you've got other things you'd like to know about this, please reach out, let me know, and thank you very much for listening. Like and subscribe if you like the content here. Appreciate it. Thanks. Bye.